Dust swirled in the town square as three young Apache braves shoved a cowgirl into the dirt. Their laughter sharp as spurs cutting flesh. She rose slowly, wiping blood from her lip, her eyes burning, not with fear, but with something that silenced even the rowdy crowd. No one expected her to move. No one expected what she was about to do. The midday sun beat mercilessly over Dry Creek, a frontier town where tempers often flared hotter than the desert air. At the center of the commotion stood Claire Dempsey, a ranch hand's daughter with calloused palms and a stubborn streak that had never served her well among men who mistook quiet for weakness. Her day had started like any other, delivering supplies from her family's farm to the trading post, but now every eye in town was fixed on her. Three Apache youths, brash and restless, had cornered her near the corral, their taunts cutting through the silence of the onlookers. They weren't starving drifters or beggars desperate for scraps. They were dressed in fringed buckskins and wore feathers braided into their dark hair, signaling pride more than necessity. They circled Claire as if she were prey, shoving her back and forth, daring her to fall. Each time she staggered, dust clung to her sweat-dampened dress, and the crowd murmured but did nothing. "You think you're tough," one jeered in broken English, his grin stretching wide. "Cowgirl, fight like a boy." The others barked laughter, egging him on. Claire clenched her jaw, her eyes narrowing beneath the brim of her hat. She could taste copper on her tongue where her lip had split, but her gaze never wavered. She'd been raised with brothers who treated her no differently than themselves, and years of ranch work had taught her how to take a hit, how to rise again without complaint. Still, this wasn't the kind of humiliation she could walk away from. From the boardwalk, townsfolk shifted uncomfortably, whispering behind calloused hands. Some feared intervening might spark a wider feud. Others simply enjoyed the spectacle. Either way, no one moved. The tallest Apache boy shoved Claire hard enough to send her to one knee. A ripple of anticipation ran through the crowd. Dust clung to her lashes, but she steadied her breathing. When she finally lifted her head, her expression had changed. Gone was the girl who could be pushed and mocked. In her eyes now burned a fire so sharp, so cold, that even the cocky youths hesitated. And that hesitation was the last chance they'd get, because Claire's next move would change the balance of power in Dry Creek forever. Claire rose from the dirt with a slowness that felt deliberate, almost theatrical, though nothing in her heart was meant for show. The bruises forming along her ribs throbbed, but she pushed through the pain, straightening her shoulders until she stood eye to eye with the tallest of the three. The murmurs from the crowd faltered. Men who had laughed moments earlier now shifted uneasily, sensing something had changed. "You've had your fun," Claire said, her voice steady but low, each word dragging through the dry air. "Now step aside." Her calmness unnerved the young braves. They had expected begging, maybe tears, not defiance. The tallest boy sneered, masking hesitation with bravado. He jabbed a finger at her chest. "Cowgirl speaks big," he spat, "but no gun, no knife. You are nothing." Claire's eyes flicked to his hand, noting the clumsy way he gripped his belt knife. She'd seen her brothers fight enough to recognize overconfidence when it dressed itself in swagger. Her instincts screamed at her to keep quiet, but another part, the one that remembered her father teaching her to rope wild colts, the part that had stood against storms without flinching, rose up stronger. The second youth stepped closer, his laughter loud, forcing the crowd to witness his mockery. "Look," he called, gesturing toward Claire, "Apache brave fight girl for sport." Some of the townsfolk chuckled nervously, unwilling to admit their discomfort. Others looked away, ashamed. No one intervened. Claire tightened her fists until her nails bit into her palms. If no one would defend her, then she would defend herself. The shove came again, harder this time. Dust clouded around her boots. Instead of stumbling, she planted her feet wide, refusing to give ground. Gasps rippled from the onlookers. "You think this is a game?" she snapped, her words cutting sharper than the knife at his side. The third youth, younger than the others, shifted uneasily. His eyes darted toward the edges of the crowd, where a few older Apache men watched in silence. Their faces were unreadable, but the younger boy caught their disapproval and faltered. "Enough," he muttered under his breath, though his companions ignored him. Claire seized the pause. In one swift motion, she reached down, scooped a handful of dust, and flung it into the face of the nearest aggressor. He reeled back, coughing and cursing, his eyes burning. The crowd erupted, half in shock, half in exhilaration. Before the second boy could react, Claire stepped forward and drove her shoulder into his chest, forcing him to stumble backward. Her movements weren't refined, but they carried the raw strength of someone who had wrestled livestock since childhood. He hit the fence with a grunt, breath knocked from his lungs. The tallest, enraged, lunged at her. Claire sidestepped, her body remembering drills with her brothers, the way they had taught her to pivot when breaking horses. His momentum carried him past her, nearly toppling him into the dirt. The townsfolk gasped again, whispers spreading like wildfire. For a heartbeat, silence blanketed the square. Then Claire spoke, her voice clear, carrying further than she expected. "You call yourselves brave. Then why does it take 3 of you to face one woman?" The insult landed heavier than any blow. Shame flickered across the younger boy's face. Even the tallest clenched his jaw, realizing too late that their mockery had twisted into humiliation. For them, Claire knew she had crossed a line. Pride wounded men faster than bullets. She steadied her breathing, waiting for the backlash. Her hands trembled, but not from fear, from the weight of what she had just ignited. The first boy, still rubbing dust from his eyes, let out a guttural growl. He yanked his knife free, the blade catching sunlight in a sudden flash. The crowd gasped as one. Claire didn't flinch. Her gaze locked on him, her stance solid. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this wasn't just about her anymore. The crowd watched, learning who in Dry Creek could be broken and who could not. The younger Apache boy whispered urgently to his companions in their own tongue, but his warning went unheard. The knife wielder took a step closer, fury overtaking reason, and then a new sound cut through the tension, the heavy stomp of boots on wood, measured, deliberate. The crowd parted slightly, faces paling as someone pushed through. Claire's heart lurched. Whoever approached had the authority to end this, or to make it far worse. The wooden steps creaked louder with each thud, until the man appeared at the edge of the square. Sheriff Amos Caldwell, broad-shouldered, with a grey mustache that drooped like the weight of too many compromises, strode forward. His badge caught the sunlight, and the tension in the air shifted instantly. The Apache youths froze, knife still glinting in the tallest one's grip. The sheriff's hand hovered near his holster, not yet touching the revolver but close enough to remind everyone that he could. "That's enough," Caldwell barked, his voice carrying over the murmurs. "Put the blade away before I decide to take it from you myself." The crowd's chatter hushed. Claire, chest heaving, kept her stance firm, refusing to show weakness now that every eye was on her. The knife wielder spat in the dirt but lowered the blade slightly, his pride battling against the lawman's authority. "This girl insult us," he growled. "She thinks she's stronger." Caldwell's gaze swept from the boy to Claire, then back. "Maybe she is. You want to prove otherwise, you do it in the ring, not in my street." Laughter rippled nervously from a few townsfolk. Claire's jaw tightened. She hated the way the sheriff framed it, as if her defense of herself had turned into sport. Still, his presence bought her a sliver of breathing room. The younger Apache, the hesitant one, muttered something in his language. Caldwell narrowed his eyes. "Speak plain, I don't have time for whispering." The youth swallowed hard and said, "She fight fair, let her be." For the first time, Claire studied him closely. He couldn't have been more than 16, his braids neat but his eyes conflicted. Unlike his companions, his arrogance faltered when faced with her defiance. He wasn't looking for blood, he was looking for a way out. The sheriff caught it too. "Listen to your friend. Walk away before you dig yourselves a hole too deep to climb out of." The tallest one sneered, defiance blazing in his eyes. "We no fear you, lawman." He shoved the knife back into his belt but stepped closer to Claire, close enough that she could smell the acrid tang of sweat and dust. His voice dropped low, so only she could hear, "Next time, no crowd, no sheriff." Claire met his gaze without blinking. Her voice came out cold. "Next time, you'll regret letting me stand today." The sheriff stepped between them, shoving the youth back with one hand. "That's it." "Get off my street." The two cockier boys hesitated, then turned sharply, striding toward the edge of town. The younger lingered, casting one last glance at Claire before following. For a heartbeat, silence returned to Dry Creek. Then the townsfolk broke into a storm of whispers. Some admired Claire's grit. Others muttered that she was reckless, foolish for provoking the Apaches further. But all agreed on one thing. What they had witnessed would not be forgotten. Caldwell turned to Claire. His expression was a strange mix of sternness and respect. "You've got more fight than sense," he muttered. "Could have ended up gutted in the dust." Claire's lip bled as she wiped it with the back of her hand. "Better gutted than humiliated." The sheriff studied her for a long moment, then shook his head. "You've made enemies today. Those boys won't let it go. Neither will their families." Claire's stomach knotted. She knew he was right. What began as harassment had turned into something deeper, an insult that demanded an answer. And in this land, grudges grew faster than weeds in the desert. "I didn't start it," she said quietly. "No," Caldwell admitted, "but you sure as hell finished it, and that means the fight's just begun." The crowd began to disperse, but not everyone turned away. On the far side of the corral, a group of Apache men stood watching, their expressions unreadable. Older, seasoned, their presence weighed heavier than the swagger of the boys. One of them, tall, with braided hair streaked by gray, met Claire's eyes with a stare that froze her in place. Caldwell followed her gaze and muttered under his breath, "That's Chief Neich himself." Claire's chest tightened. She had heard the name before, stories of raids, treaties broken, and quiet strength whispered on both sides of the frontier. The Apache leader's reputation carried both respect and fear. The chief didn't speak. He simply turned, gesturing for his men to follow. But the look he gave Claire lingered like a brand, leaving her with the gnawing certainty that this wasn't over. Caldwell leaned close. "You may think you scared those boys, but you just caught the attention of someone you don't want watching." Claire's pulse quickened. The weight of every whisper, every stare pressed down on her shoulders. She had stood her ground and silenced the mockery, but now she had stirred something far larger than she could control. And as she glanced toward the horizon, where the Apaches disappeared into the desert, a single thought burned in her mind. She hadn't seen the last of them. That night, Dry Creek did not sleep easily. The saloon lights burned longer than usual. The piano's keys struck harder, voices rising in drunken speculation about the scene in the square. Claire could feel every whisper travel like smoke through the town. By the time she returned to her father's ranch on the outskirts, she knew her life had shifted. People would no longer see her as just another ranch hand's daughter. She had stood against 3 Apaches, and that meant consequences. At the ranch, her father, Daniel Dempsey, met her at the porch with a grim face. He was a broad man, shoulders bent from years of labor, eyes carved deep with worry. "What in God's name were you thinking?" he demanded. Claire dropped her satchel on the step. "I was thinking I'd rather fight than crawl." "You don't understand," he snapped, gripping the rail so hard his knuckles whitened. "That wasn't just a fight. That was pride. Apache pride. You humiliated them in front of everyone. They'll have to answer or they lose face." "I didn't ask for this," she shot back, her voice cracking. "They cornered me. What was I supposed to do? Let them spit on me in front of the whole town?" Daniel's silence was heavy. At last he muttered, "Sometimes surviving means swallowing the insult." Claire shook her head, jaw set. "Not for me." Her father looked at her, something like sadness in his eyes. "Then you'd better be ready for what comes next." By morning, the first signs appeared, hoofprints around the corral that didn't belong to their horses, arrows stuck in fence posts, not shot to kill, but as a warning. Daniel pulled them free, his face pale. "They want us to know they were here." Claire said nothing, though her gut twisted. The younger Apache's hesitant eyes flashed back in her memory. He hadn't wanted the fight to escalate, but the others, and their chief, they wouldn't forgive so easily. Later that day, in town, the whispers turned to accusations. A shopkeeper muttered loudly enough for Claire to hear, "She's brought danger on all of us." Another man scoffed, "A woman's pride gonna cost us blood." Even Sheriff Caldwell's stance wavered. When she confronted him outside his office, he raised his palms. "I didn't say you were wrong. I said you were reckless." There's a difference. So you'd have let them humiliate me, she demanded. His jaw tightened. I'd have found another way. You've sparked something bigger than yourself. And now the whole town will pay if this turns into a feud. Claire stared him down, refusing to yield. Then let them come for me. Leave the town out of it. The sheriff shook his head slowly. That's not how it works, girl. Blood doesn't stay where it starts. By late afternoon, the air itself seemed charged. Riders spotted smoke rising from the far ridges, Apache campfires closer than usual. Hunters reported missing cattle. One rancher swore he saw figures shadowing his herd from the tree line. Fear spread like fever. That evening, Daniel found Claire cleaning the old Winchester that had belonged to her brothers. He frowned. You planning to go to war? She didn't look up. I'm planning not to be caught unprepared. He lowered himself onto the bench beside her, sighing heavily. You've got your mother's fire, and it'll burn you if you're not careful. Claire tightened the lever on the rifle, her hands steady. Then let it burn. I won't bow. Night fell heavy, and the silence outside their ranch grew too deep, too still. Claire lay awake, the Winchester across her lap, every creak of the board setting her nerves on edge. Hours dragged. Then, just past midnight, the horses in the corral screamed. Claire bolted upright, rifle in hand, heart hammering. Daniel burst from his room, shotgun ready. Together, they rushed to the porch. The sight froze them both. 4 riders stood at the edge of their property, mounted on dark horses, faces shadowed by firelight from torches they carried. They didn't move closer, but the message was clear. One raised a hand, slowly, deliberately, and pointed straight at Claire. Her stomach clenched. Daniel muttered, "It's them." The riders sat silent for a moment longer, then wheeled their horses and disappeared into the darkness, leaving only the glow of burning torches stuck in the dirt near the fence line. Claire's breath came ragged. It wasn't an attack. It was worse, a declaration. "They're marking you," Daniel whispered. "This isn't about the town anymore. It's about you." Claire's grip on the Winchester tightened until her knuckles ached. The riders hadn't spoken a word, but their silence promised everything she feared. The fight was no longer hers to choose. By sunrise, the torches still smoldered in the dirt outside the ranch, thin trails of smoke curling into the pale sky. Claire hadn't slept. She sat on the porch, rifle across her knees, staring at those blackened stakes as if they were grave markers waiting to be filled. Daniel tried to act calm, brewing coffee, but his hands shook as he poured. Neither of them spoke. When Claire finally rode into town later that morning, whispers trailed after her like dust behind hooves. Conversations hushed the moment she stepped inside the mercantile. The shopkeeper's wife, usually cheerful, offered only a curt nod before retreating to the back. 2 ranchers she'd known since childhood muttered loud enough for her to hear. "She brought this on us." Apache eyes are on Dry Creek now, all because she couldn't keep her mouth shut. Claire ignored them, but their words dug deep. She grabbed what supplies she needed, laid coins on the counter, and left without waiting for change. Outside, the weight of stairs pressed heavier than the saddle she climbed into. Sheriff Caldwell intercepted her near the livery. He looked weary, his hat pulled low. "They rode onto your land last night." Claire's jaw tightened. "You knew." He exhaled. "Word travels fast. I don't blame you for standing your ground yesterday, but I'll be plain. You're becoming a liability. Folks here are scared. Some are saying maybe it'd be better if you just left for a while." Her throat burned. "So I fight for myself. And now I'm the enemy." "No," Caldwell said, voice low, "but fear makes cowards of good men. If it comes to choosing between you and peace with the Apache, don't expect this town to stand behind you." Claire turned her horse without answering. The sheriff didn't stop her. Back at the ranch, Daniel tried to ease her anger. "They're frightened, Claire. People cling to the first scapegoat they see." "I won't hide," she shot back. "Not for them, not for anyone." That night, as the desert cooled, a different sound reached the ranch, hoofbeats, but light, hesitant. Claire rose, rifle ready, and stepped into the moonlight. A lone rider approached, dismounting just beyond the fence. It was the younger Apache boy, the one whose eyes had wavered during the confrontation. He raised his empty hands, voice barely above a whisper. "I mean no harm." Daniel tensed at the doorway, shotgun in hand, but Claire lowered her rifle an inch. "Then why are you here?" The boy's gaze darted toward the dark horizon, as if afraid of being followed. They planned to come again, not just to frighten, to punish. His English was halting but clear enough. "But I told them it is wrong. You fought fair. You showed courage. My brothers do not see." Claire's pulse quickened. "You're warning me." The boy nodded once, his expression caught between fear and defiance. "Chief Nietzsche, he watches you. He waits to see if you break. If you run, he will call it weakness. If you fight, he will call it war." Daniel stepped forward, tense. "And what do you call it, boy?" The youth's eyes flickered, shame softening his features. "I call it dangerous." "For all of us." Claire studied him, the moonlight carving sharp edges across his face. He couldn't have been more than 16, yet the burden of his people weighed heavy on his shoulders. She recognized that same heaviness in herself, the curse of being forced to stand where no one else would. "Why tell me this?" she pressed. He hesitated, then whispered, "Because once I saw my sister mocked by white men, and no one helped. You remind me of her." The words hit Claire harder than any shove or jeer. She lowered her rifle fully, her voice steady. "What's your name?" "Takoda," he said softly. Before she could reply, a sharp cry echoed in the distance, the call of another Apache. Takoda flinched, backing toward his horse. "I must go. If they find me here, I am finished." He mounted swiftly, his silhouette vanishing into the desert like smoke carried by the wind. Claire stood frozen, his warning replaying in her mind. Daniel exhaled heavily. "Now we're in deeper than ever." Claire tightened her grip on the rifle, her heart caught between fear and resolve. For the first time, she realized this wasn't just a feud of pride. It was a test, one that would either crush her spirit or ignite something far larger than herself. By dawn, Dry Creek buzzed with unease. Men paced the boardwalks with rifles slung over their shoulders. Women herded children inside, and shutters slammed closed as though wood and nails could stop vengeance. Word of the riders at Claire's ranch had spread like wildfire. In the saloon, ranchers and townsfolk crowded around Sheriff Caldwell. The air stank of whiskey and sweat, fear sharpening every whispered plan. "We can't sit here waiting," one man barked. "If they mean to strike, we hit first." "Drive them back across the ridge." Another shook his head. "You think Nietzsche will take that lying down? You'll bring the whole tribe down on us?" Caldwell raised his hand. "Enough. We're not starting a war, but we're not fools either. Patrols at night. No one rides out alone. And keep your rifles oiled." Claire stood in the doorway, listening. The moment she entered, conversations faltered. A few men shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting away, but others glared openly. "She's the reason they're circling," someone muttered. "Should throw her to 'em and be done." The words cut deep, but Claire forced herself to hold her chin high. Caldwell's jaw tightened. "That's enough talk. She's a citizen like the rest of you." But the looks on their faces told Claire the sheriff's words carried little weight. She turned and walked out, the saloon doors slapping behind her. Outside, whispers chased her like shadows. For the first time, she wondered if the Apaches were not her only threat, if the town itself might one day decide she was the easiest sacrifice. Back at the ranch, Daniel found her sharpening the edge of a knife, movements sharp and precise. "They're turning on you," he said quietly. "I know." Her voice was flat. He sat across from her. "You can't fight both sides. If the town cuts you off, you'll have no protection." Claire looked up, eyes burning. "I don't need their protection. I'll make my own." Her father sighed heavily, but before he could reply, a sound drifted from the barn, a soft rustle, too careful to be an animal. Claire snatched her rifle, moving silently. She pushed open the barn door to find Takoda crouched in the shadows, breath ragged. He rose quickly, hands empty. "I had to come," he whispered. "They planned something tonight." Daniel cursed under his breath. "You bring trouble on our doorstep, boy." Takoda shook his head. "No, I bring warning. My brothers, they drink, they rage. They say they will take her." He glanced at Claire, shame in his eyes. "Not kill, not yet, but to shame. to break. Claire's stomach turned cold. Daniel stepped forward, anger rough in his voice. Why tell us? You could stay silent. Keep your loyalty to your own. Dakota's gaze dropped. Because loyalty means nothing if it blinds you to truth. She fought with honor. My people forget what that means. Claire studied him. He risked everything by coming here, she knew. If the others discovered his visits, he would face more than shame. He would face exile, or worse. What do you want from me? She asked. Strength, he said simply. Show them you cannot be broken. If you fall, they will cheer. If you stand, they will fear. Daniel scoffed. You speak like a boy playing at war. Dakota's expression hardened. War comes whether we play or not. The weight of his words pressed into the rafters. Claire lowered her rifle slowly. Then I'll stand. That night, Dry Creek set its first patrols. Men walked the perimeter with lanterns and rifles, nerves so taut that every coyote howl had them cocking their triggers. Inside the saloon, cards went unplayed, drinks untouched. The entire town seemed to hold its breath. Claire stayed awake, pacing the porch, Winchester across her lap. Daniel dozed in the chair beside her, shotgun within reach. Midnight passed, then 1 o'clock, silence stretching thin. Then a sudden flare of light erupted on the ridge, a fire deliberately set. Moments later, another flame flickered on the opposite hill. Signals. The patrolman shouted, rifles raised, bells rang from the church steeple. Chaos rippled through the town as men scrambled to defend their homes. Claire's heart hammered. Dakota's warning was true. The Apaches weren't coming to kill. Not yet. But the fires were a message. We are here. We are watching. Daniel rose, face pale in the glow. They're tightening the noose. Claire gripped her rifle tighter, the heat of the flames reflecting in her eyes. She wasn't sure which terrified her more, the Apaches circling like wolves, or the townsfolk behind her, waiting for a reason to cast her out. The fires on the ridge burned out by dawn, leaving only blackened scars against the pale sky. Yet the memory lingered, heavy as smoke that refused to clear. Dry Creek woke restless, men snapping at wives, children kept inside, and shopkeepers muttering that war was at the doorstep. Claire felt the weight of their eyes the moment she rode into town. 2 women carrying water crossed to the other side of the street. A rancher who had once tipped his hat spat in the dust instead. The message was clear. She was the spark they wanted extinguished. Inside the mercantile, silence fell as she entered. The shopkeeper, usually talkative, set down her goods without a word. His wife kept her back turned. Claire placed coins on the counter, her hand steady though her chest burned with anger. No one looked at her as she walked out. Back at the ranch, Daniel slammed his hat onto the table. They've turned at Claire. I warned you. She faced him, voice tight. So what? I should have let them beat me in the street. Let them laugh while the whole town watched. His eyes softened, but his shoulders sagged. You don't see the bigger picture. Pride keeps you standing, yes, but pride can kill. This town's fear grows by the hour. If they believe throwing you to the wolves will save them, don't think they won't try. The words pierced deeper than any insult. For the first time, Claire felt truly alone. Not just against the Apaches, but against her own people. That night, sleep refused to come. She sat by the window, watching shadows shift across the yard. Every sound, wind in the brush, the creak of the barn set her pulse racing. Just past midnight, a soft knock tapped against the back wall. She rose, rifle ready, but when she slipped outside, she found Dakota waiting in the moonlight. He stood without a horse, breath uneven, eyes darting toward the horizon. I should not be here, he whispered. Then why are you? Claire asked, lowering her rifle slightly. His gaze met hers, steady despite the fear. Because truth weighs heavier than silence. My brothers talk of you with rage. They say your blood is owed. But I know the way you stood. It was not insult. It was honor. I cannot forget. Claire studied him in the silver light. His youth struck her, the lines of manhood not yet carved, but the gravity of his words older than his years. You risk exile coming here. He nodded. Maybe worse. But I will not watch another injustice done while I stay quiet. Daniel's voice cut from the doorway, rough with suspicion. You think your words will save us, boy? They won't. You're one against many. Dakota did not flinch. One voice can warn, one choice can change. Claire stepped closer, lowering her weapon. Then tell me the truth. What does Chief Nietzsche want from me? Dakota hesitated, glancing toward the dark hills. He waits. He tests. If you bow, if you flee, he calls you weak. If you fight, he calls it war. Either way, he wins. The knot in Claire's chest tightened. So there's no way out. Dakota's jaw clenched. There is only one way. Stand. Show them your spirit cannot break. That is the only strength Nietzsche respects. Daniel cursed under his breath. That's not a plan, that's suicide. But Claire felt something stir inside her, a grim clarity. Maybe it's the only choice I have. For a long moment, the three stood in silence, the desert night pressing close. Finally, Dakota stepped back. I cannot stay. If they know I warned you again, I will be cast out. Before he vanished into the darkness, Claire caught his arm. Why risk this for me? His eyes flickered, grief etched in their depths. Because once, my sister stood where you stand, and no one came to her side. The words lodged in Claire's chest like a blade. By the time she gathered breath to answer, he was gone, swallowed by the desert. Inside, Daniel slammed the door, his face pale. You can't trust him. He's still Apache. He could be playing you. Claire met his eyes, voice steady, or he could be the only one telling me the truth. Her father looked at her a long moment, then turned away, shoulders heavy with defeat. If you're wrong, we'll both pay the price. That night, Claire lay awake, Dakota's warning replaying in her mind. War loomed, both outside the ranch and within her own blood. She had chosen to stand, but the cost of that choice had only begun to show itself. The following days carved tension into every corner of Dry Creek. Men patrolled the streets with rifles always at the ready, lanterns swinging at night like restless fireflies. The blacksmith worked through the dark hours, hammering iron into crude spikes to reinforce doors and windows. Fear had transformed the town into a garrison. Claire felt the change every time she walked through the square. Mothers pulled children inside when she approached. Ranch hands who once traded jokes with her now turned their backs. She had become the embodiment of their dread, proof that the Apache fires on the ridge meant more than passing shadows. At the ranch, Daniel grew more restless. He spent hours checking the fence line, his shotgun never out of reach. At night, Claire caught him pacing the porch, muttering under his breath, "We can't hold off a war, Claire. We're not soldiers. We're not even a town worth fighting for." She tried to steady him. "We've held this land before. We can again." But his eyes betrayed doubt. "Not if we stand alone." The first true sign of escalation came at dawn 2 days later. Claire stepped outside to fetch water and froze. Hanging from the corral post was a deer carcass, gutted and marked with black paint smeared in patterns she didn't recognize. The stench of blood filled the morning air. Daniel stormed out behind her, face pale. "They're toying with us now. They want fear in our bones before they strike." Claire's grip tightened on the rifle. "Then they won't get it." But Daniel saw the tremor in her hand, the flicker of unease in her eyes. His voice cracked with frustration. "Damn it, Claire, this isn't just about standing tall. This is about surviving." That evening, Sheriff Caldwell rode out to the ranch, his horse lathered with sweat. He dismounted stiffly, eyes scanning the yard. "I've heard talk," he said without preamble. "Some folks are saying if you left Dry Creek just for a while, it might cool things down." Daniel bristled. "So that's the plan. Hand my daughter over to the desert like a lamb, just to buy peace." Caldwell raised his palms. "I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying fear makes people stupid, and stupid people with guns are dangerous. Think on it." After the sheriff left, Daniel's anger boiled over. "He's right, you know. Maybe if you left for a spell, stayed with kin farther west, this fire would die down." Claire's chest burned. "So you want me gone too?" His shoulders sagged. "I want you alive." The words pierced her deeper than any Apache threat. She turned from him, fighting tears. "If I run, they win. If I stay, at least I fight." For the first time, Daniel had no answer. That night, Claire found herself awake again, listening to the hush of the desert. Near midnight, Faint hoofbeats reached her ears. She grabbed her rifle and stepped onto the porch. A lone figure emerged from the darkness. Takoda. He slid from his horse. Urgency etched across his face. "You must be ready. My brothers, they grow restless. They say humiliation cannot go unanswered. Tonight, they will test you." Claire's pulse quickened. "Test me how?" Takoda hesitated. "Not with blades, with fire." As if summoned by his words, a sudden glow flared on the far ridge. Another blaze. But this time, it wasn't distant. Flames licked the edges of the grassland near the creek, smoke rising fast. Daniel burst from the house, shotgun in hand. "They're burning us out." Takoda shook his head sharply. "Not to destroy, to frighten, to drive you into the open." His voice dropped. "If you run, you are nothing. If you stand, they must respect you." Daniel's voice roared over the crackle of distant fire. "Respect? They'll kill us both." Claire steadied her rifle, her decision clear in her eyes. "Then let them come." The firelight reflected in Takoda's gaze, torn between fear for his people and something else, a flicker of loyalty he could no longer hide. The flames hissed higher, smoke rolling toward the ranch. Horses screamed in the corral. Claire felt her father's hand seize her arm. "Don't be a fool. We can still ride out. Escape while we have the chance." But Claire didn't move. She held her ground, the glow of the fire painting her face like molten steel. The fire by the creek smoldered into grey ash by morning, leaving the land scarred and black. The smell clung to everything: clothes, hair, even the walls of the ranch house. Claire sat on the porch, rifle across her knees, watching the smoke rise as though it were a message written for her alone. Daniel came out, shoulders stooped, his face drawn. "They could have burned us out last night. They chose not to." "That means something." Claire kept her eyes fixed on the horizon. "It means they want me to crack before they strike. I won't." Daniel rubbed his temples. "Stubbornness isn't strength, Claire. It's a death wish." Before she could answer, the faint rhythm of hooves carried across the yard. Claire's hand went to the rifle, but when the rider emerged, it was Takoda. He rode bareback, no weapon in sight, his expression grim. Daniel muttered, "Not again," but Claire rose and stepping down to meet him. Takoda dismounted quickly. "The elders speak now. They argue. Some say you must pay in blood. Others—" his eyes flicked to hers. "Others say you showed the spirit of a warrior. They respect that." Claire searched his face. "And what do you say?" He hesitated, then spoke firmly. "I say truth is stronger than fear, but my voice is small." Daniel snorted. "Small voices get men killed." Takoda ignored him. "Tonight they will meet again. Chief Nietzsche will decide. If he says you are enemy, nothing will stop them. But if he says you are strong, perhaps they leave you be." Claire's breath caught. "You think he'd let it end here?" Takoda's eyes darkened. "I think he waits to see if you stand alone, or if your people stand with you." The weight of his words settled heavy. She thought of the glares in Dry Creek, the whispers that painted her as the cause of all their troubles. Her people weren't standing with her. They were waiting for a chance to cast her out. Later that day, she rode into town, determined to face them. The saloon was crowded, voices sharp with fear. Sheriff Caldwell stood at the center, trying to keep order. When Claire pushed through the doors, the noise dimmed. Dozens of eyes turned on her, some hard with anger, others full of unease. One rancher spoke up, his tone venomous. "Why should we bleed for her? Let the Apaches take what they want, and maybe they leave the rest of us in peace." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Claire's jaw clenched. "So that's it? Sacrifice me, and you think they'll stop? You think handing them what they want will buy you safety?" Another man barked back. "Better you than all of us." Caldwell slammed his fist on the table. "Enough! We're not deciding her fate like vultures picking bones. We defend this town, all of it." But even the sheriff's voice sounded strained, as if his conviction was wearing thin. Claire scanned the faces, men she'd known all her life, men who'd eaten at her family's table, now looking at her like she was the enemy. "If I fall, it won't end with me," she said, her voice steady. "They'll see weakness here, and they'll take more. That's the truth you don't want to face." The silence that followed cut sharper than any blade. When she returned to the ranch, Daniel was waiting, worry etched deep into his brow. "How long do you think we can hold both sides at bay? The Apaches test us up, and the town's ready to hand you over." "It's a noose tightening from both ends." Claire sat heavily, exhaustion pressing on her bones. "Then I'll stand in the middle until it breaks." That night, Dakota appeared again, slipping through the shadows like a ghost. His face was taut with urgency. "They will test you again soon. Not with fire this time, with presence. They will come close, closer than before. They want to see if you flinch." Claire felt the air thicken around her. "And if I don't?" Dakota's answer came quiet, almost reverent. "Then you will no longer be prey. You will be something else, something they cannot laugh at." Daniel shook his head, disbelief heavy in his voice. "You talk like this is some kind of ritual." Dakota met his gaze. "For my people, it is." Claire stared into the darkness, her grip tightening on the rifle. She knew the test would come. She also knew the town would not stand beside her when it did. The sun hung high and merciless the next day when the Apache riders appeared again, this time in broad daylight. Dust billowed behind them as 6 mounted figures approached Dry Creek, their ponies kicking up clouds that glittered in the heat. They didn't attack. They didn't hide. They rode straight down the main street, slow and deliberate, every eye in town fixed on their passage. Claire stood at the edge of the boardwalk, Winchester in hand, her chest tight. Dakota had warned her, "They will come close, they will watch." The lead rider, older than the others, wore his braids tied with strips of red cloth. His face was carved by years of wind and war, his expression unreadable. He reined in his horse directly across from Claire, silence stretching so thick the town itself seemed to hold its breath. The rider's gaze raked over her, then swept to the townsfolk clustered behind her. Without a word, he raised one hand and pointed, straight at Claire. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "They've come for her." The sheriff stepped forward, hand resting on his holster. "This is town ground," Caldwell said firmly. "You don't take anyone from here." The Apache leader's eyes narrowed. He didn't speak English, but the gesture he made was universal. He tapped 2 fingers to his own chest, then thrust them toward Claire. The meaning was clear. She is the one. The tension broke in whispers sharper than blades. "Give her up. It's her they want, not us." "Why should my boy die for a cowgirl's pride?" Claire felt the stairs pressing into her back like knives. Her blood boiled, but she held her ground. "I won't go," she said, loud enough for all to hear. Caldwell turned, eyes sweeping the crowd. "You all hear that? She stands, and I'll stand with her." But the murmurs didn't stop. A rancher stepped forward, his face red with fear. "Sheriff, you're a fool. Let them have her. We can rebuild a barn, a fence, a herd, but not our lives. Better one life than 50. Claire's father shoved past the men, his shotgun tight in his grip. "You touch my daughter, and you'll answer to me." The Apache riders shifted, hands brushing weapons, the air alive with the threat of violence. Then, unexpectedly, Dakota rode forward from the group, his horse stamping nervously. Gasps spread through the townsfolk. Few had realized he was among the riders. He swung down, his hands raised, and spoke quickly in his own tongue to the elder. The older man's expression darkened, his reply sharp and clipped. Claire couldn't catch the words, but she saw the anger in Dakota's stance. His voice cracked with urgency, his body leaning forward as if pleading. The elder finally spat a reply, then wheeled his horse away. The other riders followed, dust swallowing them as suddenly as they had appeared. Silence crashed over Dry Creek. Then, all at once, voices erupted. "What did he say? Why didn't they take her? This ain't over, not by a long shot." Caldwell turned to Claire, his face pale. "You just stared down Chief Nitch's men. You think that ends it? No. That just makes it worse." Claire swallowed hard, heart still pounding. She glanced at Dakota, who lingered at the edge of town, his eyes locked on hers. He had defied his people in front of everyone, something that could cost him everything. Daniel gripped Claire's arm, pulling her close. They'll come again, stronger. This was just the warning before the storm. And for the first time, Claire saw it in her father's face, not just fear, but doubt in her resolve. That night, Dry Creek split in two. Half the town crowded into the saloon, demanding Claire be turned over to the Apaches to save the rest. The other half stayed silent, unwilling to defend her, but unwilling to see her sacrificed. Caldwell argued until his voice broke, but the divide was too deep. Claire listened from outside, every word cutting deeper. She was no longer just a woman defending her pride. She was the wedge that could shatter the town. As she rode back to the ranch under the cover of night, Takoda appeared once more, slipping from the shadows. His face was drawn, his voice low. "They will return. The chief does not forget. And now you are caught between two fires, your people and mine." Claire met his eyes, her own burning with defiance. "Then I'll stand in the flames." By the next morning, Dry Creek was a cauldron ready to boil over. The Apache riders' visit lingered in every whispered conversation, every nervous glance. No one tended their fields, no one mended fences. Instead, the townsfolk gathered in the church hall, voices rising as fear tangled with anger. Claire and Daniel sat in the back, rifles resting across their knees. The heat inside the hall was stifling, yet the chill of hostility cut sharper than any wind. Sheriff Caldwell stood at the pulpit, trying to impose order. "We cannot give in to fear," he declared. "If we hand her over, we tell the Apaches we can be broken. That means none of us will ever be safe again." A rancher leapt to his feet, face red. "Safe? Look around. They already circle us like wolves. They want the girl, not the town. Give her up and they'll leave us be." Others shouted in agreement, the din swelling. Daniel surged to his feet, voice booming. "You'll not barter my daughter's life for your comfort. If they come for her, they go through me first." Gasps rippled through the hall, but the rancher sneered. "And you'd have us all burn for her pride." Claire stood then, her voice cutting through the clamor. "This isn't about me, don't you see? If you surrender me, you tell them you'll always bend, you'll live on your knees. Maybe today it's me. Tomorrow it's your land, your cattle, your families. Once you start giving, they'll never stop." The hall erupted again, half shouting support, half spitting fury. Caldwell slammed his fist against the pulpit. "Quiet, all of you!" His voice cracked with strain. "We will vote if we must. But I warn you, once a town chooses to abandon its own, it's no town worth saving." The weight of his words silenced even the angriest. But the silence was fragile, ready to shatter at the next spark. When the meeting ended, Claire felt the stares burning into her as she and her father walked out. Whispers followed them down the steps. "She'll be the death of us. Best if she disappeared before they take her." Back at the ranch, Daniel's mask of resolve cracked. He poured himself whiskey, his hands trembling. "They'll turn on you, Claire. Maybe sooner than the Apaches." She studied him, her voice low. "So, what do you want me to do? Leave? Hide?" He stared into his glass. "Part of me thinks yes. Run west. Find safety where their shadow doesn't reach." His voice hardened. "But the other part knows if you run, you'll never stop. They'll hunt you forever." Claire felt a wave of exhaustion. "Then I stay." Daniel slammed the glass down. "Then you'd better be ready to fight like hell, because I won't outlive burying you." The night that followed was the longest yet. Patrols lit lanterns across town, their glow dotting the darkness like fragile stars. Claire sat on the porch, Takoda's warnings echoing in her head. She thought of his eyes, filled with shame and something close to hope, and wondered how much longer he could shield her before his people discovered his betrayal. Near midnight, the sound of hooves broke the stillness. This time it wasn't Takoda. 3 riders appeared at the edge of the yard, torches high. They didn't speak, didn't threaten. They dismounted, planting their torches in the earth like stakes, forming a fiery circle around the ranch. Daniel cursed. Shotgun ready. "They're marking us like cattle." Claire's heart pounded, but she stepped forward until the heat of the torches brushed her skin. "You want me," she shouted into the night. "Then take me, but I won't crawl." The riders said nothing. They mounted again, circling the ranch slowly before disappearing into the desert, leaving only the torches burning in the dirt. Daniel's voice was raw. "They're tightening the circle. Tomorrow, It won't be torches. It'll be blood. Claire's hands trembled as she tightened her grip on the rifle. She knew he was right, and somewhere in the darkness, she felt Dakota's absence like a blade. If he didn't appear tonight, maybe it meant the Apaches had discovered his betrayal. Maybe it meant the choice was already made. By dawn, the torches were still burning, their charred stumps smoking like the remnants of a funeral pyre. Dry Creek awoke with the smell of smoke and fear heavy in the air. The town bell rang before breakfast, summoning every man and woman to the square. Claire rode in with Daniel, her Winchester across her lap, jaw set hard as stone. Whispers followed her, eyes sharp as blades. Children clung to their mothers' skirts. Old men spat into the dust, muttering that she had brought a curse on them all. Sheriff Caldwell stood at the steps of the saloon, face pale and weary. He raised his hand for silence. The Apaches have sent their message clear. They won't stop. Last night was proof. His voice wavered. Some of you think giving Claire over will end this. Others say to stand with her. But hear me. We must choose. Waiting will only tear us apart. A murmur rippled through the crowd. One rancher stepped forward, his voice shaking with anger. I say we end it now, hand her to them, and this town lives. Daniel shoved through the crowd, shotgun in hand. Over my dead body. The rancher sneered. That can be arranged. Gasps spread through the townsfolk. Caldwell barked, Enough! But the damage was done. The town was split, fear feeding hatred. Claire stepped forward, her voice steady though her heart thundered. You think giving me up will buy you peace. It won't. It will buy you shame. And once you bend, you'll bend again, until nothing of this town remains. Her words cut through the air, but the crowd didn't cheer. They shifted uneasily, torn between fear and pride, survival and honor. Then, from the edge of town, riders appeared. Apache once more. Dust billowed behind them as they approached, not with stealth but with purpose, and at their head rode Chief Nietzsche himself. His presence was unmistakable. Tall, his braids streaked with gray, eyes sharp as obsidian. The crowd fell into a tense silence as Nietzsche reined in his horse. He scanned the townsfolk, then fixed his gaze on Claire. Slowly, he dismounted, each step deliberate as he crossed the square. The Apaches behind him watched like hawks, hands near their weapons. Nietzsche stopped a few paces from Claire. His voice, deep and commanding, broke the silence in rough but clear English. You shamed my sons. You stand still. Why? The square held its breath. Claire met his gaze, her chin high. Because I won't crawl. Not to them. Not to you. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Daniel's grip on his shotgun tightened. Caldwell shifted uneasily, sweat beading on his brow. Nietzsche studied her, his eyes unreadable. Then, slowly, he reached into his belt and pulled free a knife, the same one his son had raised against her days earlier. Gasps broke from the townsfolk. Daniel started forward, but Nietzsche raised his hand, halting him. The chief extended the blade toward Claire, handle first. Take, he said. If you stand with this. The silence was deafening. Claire's heart pounded, her hand trembling as she reached out. She wrapped her fingers around the hilt, the weight of it heavy with meaning. Nietzsche's eyes glinted. Tonight, we test. If you live, you are strong. If you fall, you are nothing. He turned sharply, mounting his horse in one fluid motion. The Apaches wheeled around him, dust rising as they thundered out of town. The square erupted into chaos. They'll kill us all. It's her they want, not us. What kind of madness is this? Caldwell shouted for order, but the fear was too strong. Daniel seized Claire's arm. You're not going through with this. It's a trap. Claire stared down at the knife, the blade catching the morning light. Her voice came low, steady. If I don't stand, we're finished anyway. Her father's face crumpled, torn between rage and despair. Then I'll stand with you, even if it kills us both. But deep inside, Claire knew the truth. This fight was hers alone. Nietzsche hadn't challenged Dry Creek. He had challenged her. And before the sun set again, she would face the test that would decide not only her fate, but the fate of everyone caught between two worlds. The sun slipped low behind the jagged hills, painting the desert in blood-red hues. Every sound seemed sharper, the distant howl of a coyote, the restless stamping of horses, the murmurs of Dry Creek's people gathered at the edge of town. They hadn't come to fight, they had come to watch. Claire stood at the center of the open ground beyond the corral, Winchester slung on her back, Nietzsche's knife clutched tight in her hand. She had cleaned the blade until it gleamed, though its weight felt heavier than steel. It was a symbol, not a weapon. Across from her, the Apache riders arrived one by one, torches flaring as night descended. They formed a ring, enclosing the space, their chants low and rhythmic, carrying the pulse of something ancient. At their head, Nietzsche sat tall, his gaze never leaving her. Takoda lingered at the edge of the circle, his face drawn. When his eyes found hers, they carried a silent plea: stand, but do not break. Nietzsche dismounted slowly, stepping into the circle. His voice rolled deep. You shame my sons. Now you show if shame is truth, or if courage is real. He gestured, and two young warriors entered the ring, the same ones who had mocked her in Dry Creek. Their eyes burned with fury, eager to reclaim pride. They carried no rifles, only knives, their movements sharp with restrained violence. The crowd behind Claire murmured in fear. Daniel tried to push forward, but Caldwell held him back. If you interfere, the sheriff hissed, they'll slaughter us all. Claire's pulse hammered. She gripped the knife tighter, the leather hilt damp against her palm. Nietzsche's voice thundered, stand or fall. But no running. The first youth lunged, his blade flashing. Instinct roared through her. She ducked aside, the swing cutting air. She slashed back clumsily, grazing his arm. Gasps erupted from the onlookers. Blood dotted the sand. The warrior snarled, circling again. The second moved in tandem, feinting left, striking right. Claire's years of ranch work, of breaking colts and hauling fence posts, surged through her limbs. She pivoted, blocking with the knife, feeling steel clash. The shock rattled her bones. The circle of Apaches shouted, their chants rising. The townsfolk behind the fence screamed warnings, some cheering, others cursing her stubbornness. The second youth lunged, knocking her to the ground. Dust filled her mouth, her chest burning. The knife skittered from her grasp. A roar of triumph rose from the Apache ring, but Claire didn't yield. She kicked hard, sending her attacker sprawling. She scrambled for the knife, fingers closing around the hilt. When the first warrior charged again, she spun low, slashing across his thigh. He cried out, staggering. The chants faltered, even Nietzsche's eyes flickered. Breath ragged, Claire rose. Dirt streaked across her face, her hair tangled and wild. She raised the blade, her voice hoarse but steady. I said I won't crawl. For a long moment, no one moved. The two warriors circled again, fury warring with hesitation. Then Nietzsche barked a single command in his tongue. The youths froze, chests heaving, blood dripping into the sand. Nietzsche stepped forward, raising his hand. Silence crashed over the ring. He studied Claire with an expression carved from stone, then nodded once. Enough. The two warriors retreated, shame in their eyes. Claire stood alone in the circle, chest heaving, knife still raised. Nietzsche's voice carried across the desert. She stands. She does not break. No shame. The Apache riders lowered their torches in unison, a gesture of respect. The chants shifted, no longer mocking, but solemn. Behind her, the townsfolk murmured in disbelief. Daniel's knees nearly buckled with relief, his shotgun lowering. Caldwell exhaled as though he'd been holding his breath for hours. Nietzsche stepped closer, his eyes sharp. You fight not as prey. You fight as one who belongs to the land. My sons lost pride, but you showed strength. We respect strength. He extended his hand toward her, palm open, not for alliance, but acknowledgement. Claire hesitated, then placed her hand in his. His grip was iron but steady. The circle broke. The Apaches mounted, torches raised. Nietzsche's voice thundered once more. This is finished. She is not ours to take. And just like that, the riders melted back into the night, their chants fading with the desert wind. Claire collapsed to her knees, the knife slipping from her grasp. Relief and exhaustion crashed over her in waves. Daniel rushed forward, pulling her into his arms. "You did it, girl, you stood." But even as he held her, Claire's eyes searched the darkness where Takoda had vanished. She knew his defiance in warning her had played its part, and that his own battle was only beginning. The dust settled slowly after that night, as though even the desert itself struggled to believe what had happened. The Apache riders vanished beyond the ridge, their torches dwindling into the horizon. Dry Creek awoke the next morning in uneasy silence. For the first time in weeks, no smoke rose from the hills, no hoofbeats thundered through the night. But peace did not feel like peace. It felt like waiting. Claire stayed at the ranch, her body aching from the fight, her hands blistered where Nietzsche's knife had cut into her palm. Daniel hovered close, fussing over her wounds, but his eyes betrayed a pride he no longer tried to hide. "You didn't just stand," he murmured one evening. "You made them see you. You made this whole town see you." Yet the town's gaze was not so simple. Some looked at her with awe, whispering that she had saved Dry Creek by proving herself in the Apache circle. Others muttered that she had only delayed the inevitable, that her defiance had marked them all for future bloodshed. When she ventured into the mercantile, the shopkeeper's wife handed her goods without meeting her eyes. A rancher muttered, "One woman's pride nearly cost us everything." But behind him another man added quietly, "And one woman's courage might have saved it." The town was divided, and Claire walked between those divisions like a shadow no one could ignore. Sheriff Caldwell stopped her outside the saloon one afternoon. His voice was gruff, but softer than before. "You've got more grit than I've seen in this town in years. But grit cuts both ways. You've earned their respect, maybe even Nietzsche's. Don't waste it." She nodded, but her thoughts drifted to Takoda. He hadn't appeared since the night of the fight. Whispers spread that he'd been punished for warning her, that Nietzsche had cast him out. Each night, Claire stood on the porch, staring toward the hills, waiting for the faint sound of hoofbeats. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, a lone rider appeared. Takoda. His shoulders slumped with exhaustion, but when he dismounted, his eyes held the same steady fire. "They know," he said simply. "My voice is no longer welcome in the council. I am apart." Claire's chest tightened. "Because of me." Takoda shook his head. "Because of truth. I chose it, as you chose to stand. The price is mine to carry." Daniel watched from the porch, shotgun in hand, his expression wary. But when Takoda turned to leave, Daniel called after him, "You ever need food or shelter? You'll find it here. You've earned that much." It was the closest thing to acceptance the boy would ever receive from the rancher, and Takoda dipped his head in gratitude before disappearing once more into the desert night. The days that followed brought a fragile calm. The Apache fires on the ridge ceased. Cattle returned unharmed. Traders passed through town without tales of raids or skirmishes. Life resumed, but never as it had been. The memory of the circle, the girl who stood with a knife against two warriors, became part of Dry Creek's story, repeated in whispers, retold with awe, sometimes twisted by fear. Claire bore it quietly. She had not fought for glory or legend. She had fought because she would not crawl. And though the cost had been high, Takoda's exile, the town's fractured trust, she knew the choice had been the only one she could live with. One evening, sitting by the fire with her father, she asked softly, "Do you think they'll come again?" Daniel poked at the flames, his eyes distant. "Maybe, maybe not. But if they do, they'll remember what they saw. That matters." Claire nodded, her hand resting on the scar the knife had left. She knew the fight would never truly be over. Strength had bought her time, but survival on this land meant living always on the edge of storms. Still, as the wind carried the scent of mesquite and the desert stars blinked awake, she felt something new, a strange, steady peace. Not because danger was gone, but because she had met it and had not been broken. She closed her eyes, hearing again the words Takoda had spoken. Stand but do not break. That was what she had done. And that was what she would keep doing. In the end, Claire's story wasn't about defiance for its own sake. It was about refusing to be diminished, even when fear demanded surrender. Her stand reminded Dry Creek, and even her enemies, that strength doesn't always come from numbers or weapons. Sometimes it comes from a single person who refuses to bow. And perhaps that's a lesson worth carrying, whether you ride under the desert sun or walk streets far from the frontier. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe and join us for the next tale of courage, sacrifice, and survival. And if you want more, don't miss the video we've linked at the end. It's one you won't forget.